so much for checking out my show. Really appreciate it. Please click to subscribe. Really appreciate all the support. It's actually early in the morning when I'm taping this. I'm in the airport, I'm on the move. Actually working on a couple of new Nancy Guthrie stories. But in this episode, really interesting. I am digging into a couple of things. I'm talking to famed profiler, FBI profiler, Jim Clemente. First of all, he has a really detailed analysis of the blood spatter that was outside Nancy Guthrie's house. An analysis in a way that I haven't seen before, which I think you're gonna find really interesting, and it really tells a story, he says. Also, what is the suspect or suspects in the Nancy Guthrie case? What are they thinking now? What sort of behavior are they exhibiting now, more than 2 months after the abduction? And how could that help people know what to look for in terms of tracking them down? Jim Clemente always just has such interesting analysis of these kinds of things because of his experience with the FBI as a profiler. I'm talking to him and getting into all of it in this episode of Brian Ensign Investigates. Jim, thank you for joining me again. Really appreciate it. It's nice to see you. I wanted to start with you because with what you have been looking at with the blood spatter patterns, because I know you went back and analyzed the video that we were able to take up on the front porch area of Nancy's house. What stood out to you?
Well, first of all, it was great to actually get the video itself so I could do it frame by frame and then isolate some images, because blood spatter evidence, mainly because of the viscosity of blood, the nature of blood, tells us a story. And it is frozen in time. It's a particular moment in time that this happened. But if you look at the first image where there's two distinct blood spatters,
it records the exact moment of the incident. Looking at the initial image, we see two distinct biological patterns. This image provides clear forensic indicators. In the center, we observe several larger droplets of blood on the surface. Adjacent to those are smaller droplets, while the right side of the frame shows a classic smear pattern. This indicates a person physically disturbing blood that was already present on that porch. The evidence builds a narrative. In the overview, it is clear these two spatter patterns occurred almost simultaneously. They point toward a specific action occurring between them. Let's move forward to the next forensic image now. This still image provides a high-resolution close-up of the central blood pattern visible in the previous frame. These details are highly specific. The primary takeaway is that Nancy's position was extremely close to the ground. Her face was positioned within 1 foot of the ground, indicating she was either on her knees or hunched over. While she could have been prone, the physical evidence suggests she was likely not laying flat on the ground. The pattern indicates she was hunched over this specific spot, evidenced by the presence of low-velocity blood spatter. We also see medium-velocity spatters. Forensics generally categorizes these impacts as low, medium, or high velocity. High-velocity spatter consists of microscopic, mist-like droplets resulting from extreme force or impact. This specific pattern typically only occurs during high-impact trauma, such as a gunshot wound. However, medium-velocity patterns can also be created when a victim aspirates blood and then coughs it out. We see two indicators of aspiration here. First, the minute size of many of these specific blood spots. Second, look at the top of the image. There are 3 circular blood spots that appear completely hollow. You primarily see rings because the blood contained air, creating bubbles that indicate it was exhaled. When those bubbles burst upon impact, they left behind these characteristic rings instead of solid droplets. This blood clearly originated from her airway. She coughed it out. The larger droplets show very little directionality. In contrast, some smaller droplets are longitudinal or oblong, which is a key tactical indicator. The shape reveals the exact trajectory the blood followed before it impacted this particular porch surface. Not every drop is uniform. The variation exists because she was forcefully coughing this blood out during the assault. The blood dispersed in multiple directions, and I believe this forensic evidence tells a very specific story. This data provides a clinical, clear picture of the violent struggle that occurred on that porch. I am confident this reconstruction reveals a clear crime scene. This provides us with a definitive, Nancy began coughing up blood right there on the porch, and some of those pools kept their shape. Several bubbles had already burst, a forensic indicator that her face was likely positioned within 12 inches of the ground. Her mouth was just inches from the surface, angled almost straight down as she struggled to breathe through the trauma. This positioning suggests she was either forced onto her knees or was hunched over in a state of total physical collapse. She was doubled over with her face toward the door, and the distribution shows the heaviest concentration of spatter concentrated on the left. An 84-year-old woman was abducted from the safety of her home during the dead of night. No signs of forced entry were found inside the house, only a propped back door and a grim trail on the porch. That blood tells a brutal story, so I reviewed the evidence with retired FBI profiler Jim Clemente for a deeper analysis. He scrutinized the outdoor security footage frame by frame, and the details he extracted from those images are absolutely haunting. These droplets did not originate from a simple scrape, as they were hollow ring shapes containing clear signs of air bubbles. That specific pattern only occurs when blood is coughed up, meaning Nancy was mere inches from the ground at that moment. Forced onto her knees, she likely tried to fight back, but she was met with a direct, violent strike to the face. The violence peaked at her doorstep, but then the trail ends, leading Clemente to believe she was physically lifted off the ground. She was likely carried face up to a getaway car to prevent further evidence from falling, suggesting a single, likely inexperienced offender. He carried a unique Walmart backpack with reflective straps and wore an entirely ineffective face mask. That mask actually shed his own DNA across the crime scene, a catastrophic error that a professional criminal would have easily avoided. The motive was clearly financial, evidenced by 2 ransom notes sent to local Arizona stations containing a linked Bitcoin wallet address. Either the FBI or the family deposited the funds and sent a single message stating that they were prepared to negotiate. No response ever arrived, and Clemente believes that silence is proof that Nancy had already been killed by that point. Currently, that suspect is tracking every news cycle and altering his look while desperately hoping that the authorities do not close in. Stick with us here at Cold Case Corridor and subscribe now so you do not miss a single update as the case unfolds. This image shows a smudge where someone clearly interfered with the blood after it was initially deposited on the surface. After the blood landed, someone touched that specific spot and moved it, creating a visible smear across the porch. Looking at the large stain situated higher and to the right, you can clearly see a distinct tail trailing off. That tail extends toward the right, and if you examine the middle circular droplets, you can see evidence of trapped air. Since it was originally a bubble, there is another tail following that same trajectory toward the right side of the frame. The droplet located just below that one also appears to exhibit that same directional pattern in its distribution. I would conclude that her body was positioned to the left of this view, facing back toward the front entrance. Her head was oriented away from the door and pointed almost directly down. But do you have any questions about this positioning? This looks like a fine spray, which matches what you would expect from her coughing. That is medium velocity, as coughing generates a significant amount of force during the initial movement. It does not reach the extreme speed of a gunshot wound, which is why it is categorized as medium velocity impact. We might not even call them droplets, especially when looking at the specific marks that clearly resemble popped air bubbles. However, some appear to be standard, larger blood droplets, so do you believe those also originated from the coughing fit? Could those be from a separate injury? No, I do not believe another wound was responsible for those marks. It is more likely that the blood simply dripped down, meaning she coughed first and then more fluid fell naturally afterward. That seems most plausible, and if we examine the next image captured directly to the right, more evidence appears. The doormat is visible on the left side here, and we can see several more captures of these blood droplets. Both solid droplets and air-filled bubbles are visible, particularly in the top center portion of this specific photograph. There are 2 distinct droplets and 1 bubble here, with another single droplet visible toward the bottom left of the frame. You can identify 1 droplet followed by a bubble, while several more bubbles appear further over on the right side. Then a smear pattern becomes evident, confirming that the blood was interfered with after it had already been deposited there. It is possible someone stepped in it, or perhaps a hand or another body part made direct contact with the pool. They made contact and smeared it, so let us return to that first image to re-examine the initial scene. This evidence clarifies exactly where the victim and her attacker were positioned during the height of their violent physical struggle. This timeline reveals a critical window where forensic evidence suggests one thing at this specific moment: there was a peak likelihood. The probability is that she was forced down to her knees or bent double, keeping her face inches from the ground. She was violently coughing up blood, yet where the trail abruptly stops, the evidence indicates a sudden change in her physical state. She was likely hoisted up and carried the remaining distance, positioned face up to ensure no further biological evidence stained that walkway. The concrete path remains clear. Bryant, tell me, have you confirmed if forensics located any actual blood spatter patterns within the residence interior? Current intel says no, as the primary blood evidence appears limited to the exterior space directly outside the front door. Conflicting media reports cite anonymous sources claiming blood was found inside the entrance, but my contacts remain firm on this. While some claim a trail leads inward, my primary source insists the scene is contained strictly to the doorstep exterior. That is the intel for now. However, if spatter exists on the interior doorframe, it changes the entire tactical timeline. It confirms Savannah's account that her mother was forcibly removed from her own bedroom in the middle of the night. Taken straight from her bed, she was likely dominated through fear and physical intimidation by her aggressive captor. He likely utilized a firearm tucked into his waistband, using the weapon to maintain absolute psychological and physical leverage. With the barrel pressed against her, he forced her toward the exit, where she finally realized he intended to leave. He was moving her from the residence, and our training is clear: if someone tries to relocate you, they are dangerous. When an attacker forces a change in location, they are hunting for a space that offers them total isolation. Privacy equals control in their mind, and that shift in the power dynamic is often fatal for the victim. You must resist with everything you have, because being moved to a secondary crime scene is an execution sentence. Your statistical survival rate drops to near zero the second you are taken from a secure environment to his territory. Nancy fought him there, likely at the threshold or just inside the front entrance. The physical struggle likely began where the first forensic evidence of blood spatter actually marks the ground. She was likely incapacitated with a sudden blitz of force, taking a heavy blow to the face or nose area. As she started bleeding, she dropped low or hunched over, eventually coughing up a significant volume of blood. This explains the specific spatter pattern. After the impact, the suspect likely grabbed her to complete the abduction. Footprints or physical contact smeared the fresh blood she had just coughed onto the floor, creating the distorted trail. These smeared patterns indicate a struggle, followed by a period where her body was being moved toward a vehicle. He carried her to a car, likely rotating her face toward the sky to stop blood from dripping further. This shift in positioning explains why the blood trail terminates abruptly despite her significant facial injuries. Your insight is compelling, and it brings back our off-camera discussion regarding the critical nature of these abduction scenarios. We debated the life or death decision of whether a victim should ever comply and get into a suspect's vehicle. I suggested compliance might lead to an escape later, but you were firm, never get in. Nancy, however, clearly lacked any control. As an elderly victim, she was overpowered. But for the viewers watching, the directive is clear: you fight with everything. Exactly. Resisting the vehicle is paramount, though rare success stories do occur, like the case we saw just recently. A young girl was targeted while waiting at a bus stop, approached by a man who moved in fast. He pulled up, jammed a gun into her spine, and forced her inside. But witnesses were watching from the street. Bystanders alerted the police while he drove her to a gas station, eventually bringing her inside for an unknown reason. Once inside, she silently mouthed a plea for help to the cashier, who bravely stepped in to separate them. The clerk ejected the suspect just as the police intercepted him, but such a positive outcome is incredibly rare. In that case, witnesses could identify the perpetrator and his vehicle, which significantly increased her odds of survival. License plates and descriptions help, but remember, an abductor is always moving you toward a more controlled environment. They are transporting you to a pre-selected kill zone or a location where they have established deep personal connections. They have likely surveilled the area beforehand or already have total authority over that specific physical space. When an attacker controls the environment, the chances they intend for you to survive the encounter are virtually non-existent. They cannot leave a living witness to identify the crime scene or the perpetrator. Your only option is to deploy every personal weapon available, including biting with maximum force. Gouge their eyes, tear at their ears, and kick. Do whatever is necessary to save your life. Strike the groin, do whatever is necessary, scream, scratch, and fight like hell to ensure you are never moved to a secondary location. A place where they have absolute custody and control. Do you suspect there was more than one perpetrator involved here? You previously believed this was the work of a lone actor. Do you still hold that theory, or suspect multiple assailants? I believe this suggests a solo operative because the forensic blood spatter evidence does not show multiple distinct phases of a struggle. If two people were involved, one would expect a partner to maintain absolute physical dominance over her inside the residence at all times. They would have moved her outside without ever losing that grip or allowing her the chance to resist the way she did. But she is found on the ground coughing up blood. Since this is the only evidence of trauma, it was likely the attack site. That means she engaged him right there, forcing him to use brutal measures to regain control and secure his hold on the victim. After that point, she was hoisted and carried away, which explains why we see no further spray or droplets along the exit route. What kind of mind is capable of inflicting that level of violence on a defenseless 84-year-old woman? Perhaps I am just naive, but I find it nearly impossible to process the clinical reality of someone hunting an elderly lady. I can understand an altercation between equals, but targeting a vulnerable senior is something I struggle to mentally wrap my head around. I could imagine someone striking out in anger at another adult, but the cold calculation of doing this to an old woman is unthinkable. I would expect any person to just walk away and abandon the entire plan before doing something that horrific to an elder. Right. This reveals the nature of his motive. There was a specific objective, and he was prepared to do anything to achieve it. The evidence suggests that his goal was the forced removal of Nancy from her residence in the middle of the night. As for his ultimate intentions beyond that abduction, we are left in the dark. It remains a complete and total investigative mystery. This brings us back to the ransom notes. If any of those letters were genuine rather than tactical decoys meant to confuse, intended to distract the family and investigators, then it is clear that financial gain was one of his primary goals. To secure that money, he needed to maintain total control and use her life as leverage to extort the funds. However, the facts show that scenario never materialized, likely because his criminal competence fell far short of his own expectations. He was not as prepared as he thought. This shows in his use of a unique backpack sold only at Walmart retail stores. He also wore a pack with high-visibility reflective straps, making him an easy target for any witness or nearby surveillance cameras. Furthermore, his face mask was breathable, allowing him to lose hairs and leave behind DNA evidence wherever he moved through the scene. A standard surgical mask would have easily contained that biological evidence and kept his identity much better protected from forensic teams. He attempted to be sophisticated, but in reality, his tradecraft was amateurish and filled with critical errors that left a forensic trail. Regarding those ransom notes, Savannah suspects two were potentially legitimate. We recently learned those two were sent to Arizona television stations. One of those stations revealed a Bitcoin address was linked to the demand. Looking at that crypto account, things get interesting. Records show a single transaction occurred on February 10th. A small deposit was made into the digital wallet from an outside source. It was likely sent by the Guthrie family or the FBI as a test. There was a brief note attached to it. The phrasing was specific. "We are ready to talk. Contact us." This is critical information we did not have until now. After that initial contact, the account went completely silent. No activity followed. What do you think that sudden lack of communication signifies? If the motive was money and the family established contact, why was there no response? It defies the logic of a kidnapping. Honestly, Brian, I suspect the reality is far darker. I believe she likely passed away during that specific window of time. He lost his collateral. Once the hostage was gone, he simply chose to cut off all further communication immediately. His decision to send those notes to the media also exposes his lack of experience. Kidnappers usually avoid public attention and scrutiny. Public attention brings police in immediately. That is a massive error for any kidnapper. He realized he no longer had what they wanted and likely decided to cut off all communication. He also might have seen that the suspect showed his priorities through his action of what kidnappers actually want. They avoid the media because high-profile attention guarantees the police will get involved. That involvement means law enforcement responds immediately. This factor distinguishes this case from most other high-profile kidnapping investigations we see. This specific detail separates this case from standard abduction profiles we usually examine. Normally, total secrecy is the only way to get paid and escape without being caught. Maintaining a strict element of silence is what helps them get paid and vanish. That element of secrecy is the only way to get the money and escape. In any abduction, the fatal liability is the exchange, the high-risk moment where the victim is traded for cash or Bitcoin. Cryptocurrency like Bitcoin offers the suspect a layer of digital protection, potentially allowing him to secure the ransom and vanish. He could have secured the funds and vanished, but for some reason, the suspect hesitated and went completely dark. I believe the suspect grew paranoid once the victim's family attempted to initiate direct communication. That outreach was likely a tactical move by the family to establish a line of dialogue and force a mistake. The goal was to extract actionable intelligence, verify the suspect's demands, and secure critical proof of life before moving forward. It is a devastating reality that these circumstances turned so tragic. The suspect simply never responded to the Guthrie family. In my experience, that silence is a grim indicator that something went catastrophically wrong during those missing hours. What is the psychological state of the suspect, assuming it is a male, as he sits and watches this unfold right now? I am confident the individual on that surveillance video is a man. The evidence does not suggest any other accomplices. Could there be a secondary suspect behind the scenes? Possibly, but we have zero forensic proof of a larger conspiracy. There is no physical data placing a second person at the primary crime scene, suggesting a lone wolf scenario is most likely. If investigators had found 3 distinct footwear patterns within the blood evidence, that would change my entire profile. The distribution of blood spatters and stains tells a much more singular story. Perhaps they recovered multiple DNA profiles from the residents that seem to be linked to the struggle. I have not seen that specific evidence confirmed yet, so I will reserve my final judgment on the number of attackers. Right now, the suspect is likely obsessed with one question. Did I actually get away with this horrific act? He is wondering if he successfully hid the body forever and if he left any trail that leads back to him. He is gambling on the hope that forensic teams cannot link the victim's remains to his specific identity. This individual is likely glued to every single news report on the case. He might be probing his social circle for information or even manufacturing a false alibi to distance himself from the timeline. He wants to ensure that if questioned, others will swear he was miles away from the abduction site that night. That is a classic defensive move, but I believe he is also working hard to physically vanish. He is likely altering his appearance and modifying his vehicle to avoid being flagged by license plate readers or witnesses. He may try to sell the car much like Rex Hoyerman did to put maximum distance between himself and the forensic evidence. He needs to separate himself from the victim's location, perhaps by leaving town for a fabricated family emergency or sudden trip. He will stay away until the heat dies down, but the critical errors he made during the crime will be his downfall. His errors began during the planning phase and continued straight through the execution of this violent act. Even the pre-attack surveillance shows he was sloppy, and that lack of security is why he will be caught. Whether it is DNA recovered through genetic genealogy or a sudden shift in his behavior, The authorities are closing in. He likely leaked incriminating details before the event or spoke to the wrong person afterward, creating a trail for law enforcement. Eventually, someone will notice the red flags and call the police. If he is as inexperienced as the evidence suggests, he is panicking. Does his amateur status and the weight of these errors mean his confidence is crumbling under the pressure of the investigation? I believe so. He is likely spiraling because of the gravity of the situation. That paranoia is why he is desperate to change his look and mask the identity of the vehicle he used. The sheriff has expressed concerns about him striking again, but based on the psychological profile, that scenario seems less probable. This does not look like the work of a seasoned offender who has a history of repeating these patterns. No clear markers suggest this suspect has committed a violent abduction of this specific magnitude before. Since we lack evidence of prior crimes, I do not believe he is currently a serial threat, though he remains extremely dangerous. Most offenders follow a predictable path of behavioral escalation. It usually begins with precursor offenses like peeping or home burglaries before they graduate to the act of kidnapping. This might have been his first major escalation into high-risk abduction, but without the full case file, we cannot be certain. I would need to analyze the specific forensic data from the crime scene to make a definitive psychological determination. Having access to the raw investigative findings would clarify the suspect's level of experience and risk. I firmly believe his drive was exceptionally intense. He executed the plan even when she resisted, pushing through her refusal to comply with his demands. He maintained total dominance following that physical struggle, likely reclaiming control after she attempted to challenge his authority. She likely fought back or simply refused to move another single inch. This profound level of psychological drive likely stems from a specific set of deep-seated financial triggers or complex personal motives. A calculated financial gain might be the primary catalyst behind this high-stakes abduction. If pure profit drove him, he likely understood her direct link to Savannah and the family's substantial net worth and assets. He saw the house as a target, believing its affluent location signaled a massive potential payout. The sheer scale of the property confirmed his theory of wealth. He either conducted extensive pre-attack surveillance or established direct contact with the victims before the incident. Over several months, he observed Nancy's routine, identifying her as a vulnerable target living entirely alone. He wagered that her daughter would pay any price demanded to ensure her mother's safe and immediate return. Plainly stated, a cold financial motive aligns perfectly with the evidence. Yet the silence is telling he never once replied to the Bitcoin account when the Guthrie family attempted contact. This raises a grim possibility. He might be inflicting deliberate, calculated psychological torture on the survivors. Precisely, we are looking at a potential stalking motive fueled by obsession. Stalkers typically construct an elaborate internal fantasy, projecting their own twisted desires onto an unsuspecting target. They believe their fixation should belong to them, demanding total attention and absolute compliance from their chosen victim. When the victim fails to provide that validation, the offender's behavior rapidly escalates into violence. This abduction might have been a desperate play to force Nancy's attention. More likely, this was a calculated move to seize Savannah's undivided attention through terror. It worked perfectly. Savannah was forced to issue direct, public pleas to the unknown captor. At that moment, she was under his psychological thumb, which alone may have satisfied his dark cravings. Witnessing the raw agony etched onto Savannah's face was the goal. This sadistic satisfaction likely fueled him, especially if he felt slighted or ignored by her previously. He sought revenge for perceived rejection, even if the entire relationship existed solely within the confines of his mind. Beyond fantasy, he may have had a professional link, perhaps working on the property or performing routine maintenance. He could be the poolman, a landscaper, or even a rideshare driver. These seemingly mundane interactions provided the critical intelligence required to execute such a high-risk criminal operation. Given your background with trauma victims, Savannah's emotional state raises a very specific forensic question. She is trapped in a permanent state of limbo, haunted by the unknown fate of her missing mother. Living with the constant fear that an assailant is still watching her family is an unbearable psychological burden. How do you advise anyone to survive this? Even a tragic discovery would offer more closure than this void. Physical evidence usually brings resolution, but without it, she is forced to return to work while her world remains shattered. Navigating that reality is nearly impossible, yet the resilience I have seen in families continues to astound me. The fortitude required to endure this day after day, year after year, is nothing short of heroic. Tragically, many of these cases remain cold for decades before a single shred of truth finally surfaces. Many families suffer relentlessly throughout the entire ordeal. Others channel their grief into advocacy, fighting to protect future victims from similar violent crimes. I have watched cold cases break open after 40 years, solely because forensic technology finally caught up with the killer. Sometimes a deathbed confession or a witness finally losing their fear provides the crucial evidence needed for an arrest. The only path forward for the Guthries is intensive counseling and direct engagement with specialized victim services. This level of trauma is profound and requires professional, clinical intervention. It is the only structural support preventing a total psychological collapse in the face of such overwhelming uncertainty. From your perspective within law enforcement, there is one other critical detail I need to address. Look at Savannah. At what point does her frustration with the investigators boil over? Consider her background. She is effectively a legal and media insider. She is a practicing attorney who worked at Court TV and reported on major criminal cases. Naturally, she is critical of the department when a violent case remains unsolved. Does the dynamic turn adversarial when you are the face of law enforcement? What happens when grieving families aren't getting the answers they deserve? Tension is inevitable, but seasoned investigators must look past the emotional friction. Professionals maintain their duty, ensuring constant communication and full cooperation with the family. The mission continues regardless of how hostile a reaction might be. Take the Colonial Parkway serial murders. That specific investigation stretched across several grueling decades. In that Virginia case, multiple couples were targeted and murdered in cold blood. Forensic DNA analysis finally provided answers, though decades passed before those scientific breakthroughs occurred. Quite recently, forensic evidence linked another murdered couple to that same serial killer. Scientific testing finally proved a direct connection to the other homicides. Throughout that massive time frame, family members endured extreme psychological angst and anxiety. The delay was agonizing, especially as some cases were closed while others remained cold. Fury often flared among the families when their specific cases saw zero progress. Relatives would demand to know why their loved ones were being ignored. Ultimately, high-level police professionalism must always dictate the response from the law enforcement side. It does not matter what the victims are saying or the trauma they suffer. Our mandate is securing legal justice, not engaging in tactical stagnation or retributional inaction. Detectives are expected to grind forward until every lead is exhausted and solved. Reports confirm that absolutely nothing was stolen from the interior of the residence. Forensic teams found no physical evidence of a struggle or assault inside. Consider the tactical implications of the fact that the back door was propped wide open. Let's analyze that. First, I will address the fact that nothing was missing. The absence of theft confirms that the primary motive was not a burglary. This was no random robbery. This was a targeted, high-stakes abduction of an elderly victim. Her proximity to a high-profile celebrity likely provided the core motivation here. 2 ransom notes were discovered, and investigators believe these written demands are entirely authentic. Financial gain appears to be the primary driver, which is statistically common in kidnapping cases. A victim is snatched with the intent of trading their life for cash. Propping those rear doors open suggests the intruder likely entered the property from that specific point. The offender wanted a guaranteed escape route in case he needed to exit the premises rapidly. He could bolt toward a pre-planned extraction point that he deemed the safest possible path. Taking her out the back door remains a possibility, but logically, that specific theory simply falls apart. Why choose the front exit when there is a much more secure door and gate available? The propped back door suggests a tactical diversion. His real exit was through the front door. That entrance provided the most direct and efficient access to his vehicle. Some suspect multiple kidnappers were involved, but forensic evidence does not support that specific theory.